by initiating the annual Institute on College Student Values. And just look at the Institute themes. They all speak of moral development, character building, social responsibility, and civic engagement. With his strong commitment, solid professional reputation, and personal appealing personality, John attracted a top-notch collection of nationally recognized leaders to address these topics at the level of complexity they require. Experienced and concerned workshop leaders, like those of you doing concurrent sessions this year, addressing these issues where the rubber meets the road in their own institutions and with various multi-institutional efforts, have found this a very welcoming environment to share their work and get constructive feedback from diverse peers. During its 20 years, for many of us, working in less than enthusiastic or hospitable home environments, this annual event has not only provided intellectual stimulation and useful contacts, more importantly perhaps, it has provided emotional support to help sustain the cool passion we need to tackle these forces, the forces of institutional and systemic inertia, and in some cases active opposition. John's final question to us is, in what ways have colleges and universities succeeded or failed in the moral and civic development of college students? To respond to these questions, I have to be clear first about my criterion for judgment. And for me, colleges and universities are our most important institutions for sustaining our democracy. By that criterion, in my judgment, they've failed. They have failed to graduate, we, citizens who can function at the levels of cognitive, moral, intellectual, and ethical development that our complex national and global problems require. Consider the challenges faced by our federal, state, and local politicians, policymakers, and diverse vested interests, and us as citizens. We need to strengthen and sustain a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, internationally interdependent, pluralistic democracy. That's a big mouthful, but all those conditions apply. We need to identify and support policies, practices, and resource allocations that anticipate the dislocations and disruptions that will accompany global warming and the steady depletion of oil reserves, the peak oil issue. We need to contain and help ameliorate recurrent intertribal, interethnic, and interreligious conflicts. We need to address basic issues concerning public education, healthcare, and an aging population. We need to create a globally recognized example of participatory government where all persons, regardless of socioeconomic status, national origin, race, religious or spiritual orientation, are actively involved. To be effective, all our citizens must be able to function at levels of intellectual, emotional, and social complexity required to meet our beleaguered globe's economic, environmental, human, and political challenges. During the last 2 years, we've experienced the worst economic recession since the 1930s Depression, when I grew up. Heavy budget cuts, 30% drops in endowments, and reduced giving and philanthropic support are creating severe financial shortages across higher education. Students are being turned away from community colleges, to which increasing numbers have moved to cope with significant tuition increases in public and private four-year institutions. Jobs are scarce for our graduates. These pressures create powerful challenges for our institutional priorities and policies and practices. But as I read papers in magazines and track political decision-making, listen to talk shows, and experience the general culture, we're far from the levels of complex functioning required. From my personal perspective, unfortunately, our political, economic, and social systems and the policies, practices, and resource allocations decisions associated with them are functioning at the most base levels articulated by various seminal human development theorists. Jane Leverenger's ego development puts impulsive, self-protective, and conformist behaviors at the bottom. The following stages are conscientious, behaving according to self-evaluated standards, self-criticism, guilt for consequences, and long-term goals and ideals. Individualistic, respect for individuality. Autonomous, coping with conflicting inner needs. And integrated, reconciling inner conflicts, renouncing the unattainable. I submit we're not functioning at these higher levels. In Kohlberg's cognitive moral development theory, fear of punishment, gratifying personal needs, bargaining with others for mutual benefit, and conforming to peer groups' issues are the lower stages, with adherence to personally chosen or universal moral and ethical principles at the top. Bill Perry's scheme of intellectual and ethical development puts dualistic either-or, good-evil, black-white thinking at the bottom, moving through multiplicity and relativism to commitment in relativism. Women's Ways of Knowing by Belenky, Clinchy, Goldberger, and Terrell puts silence and received knowledge at the bottom, with development moving through procedural knowledge, separate knowing to culminate in constructive knowing, where personally important, experientially validated knowledge is integrated with knowledge learned from others. From my perspective, and from the point of view of these seminal theorists, we're functioning at the most base levels. I don't need to elaborate this further. I leave you each to make your own decisions and judgments. But as you do, I'd ask you to remember the language and behaviors that characterize the August community meetings concerning healthcare issues and subsequent Tea Party activities. Those demonstrations across the country do not document a citizenry functioning at the levels of cognitive and affective complexity our problems require. I'll venture one reason for this shortfall. During the last 30 years or so, higher education has come to be seen as a private benefit rather than as a public good. Some of us in this room, every year fewer of us, remember what education at state colleges was basically free. State-supported with inexpensive residencies and small student fees. Now the numbers I have heard put state support in the 25 to 35% range. As state support has been cut, tuition increases have been authorized. These dynamics have driven more and more students to community colleges for their first 2 years and pushed institutions inexorably toward a market mentality. Responding to students' and parents' limited conceptions of what they need for a successful career and a good life has become paramount. Concern for cognitive and moral development has dropped away. The larger issues of interdependence, identity, purpose, meaning, and integrity have been replaced by short-term goals oriented toward a well-paying job upon graduation. If they're going to pay all that tuition and accrue substantial debt, they have no time for more long-range and more fundamental goals. Now, all or most of us in this room know they